we spoke with Hagulian and Hal. Well, I don't know, maybe 5 months ago now, something like that.
Yeah, it
Uh,
was in June. I was surprised it was so long ago. But I
yeah,
just saw on Skype here, June 24th. Yeah.
yeah, and at the time, although our discussion then wasn't solely focused on foreign policy, that's kind of your beat, and so that's why I wanted to get you on here, and
Yes.
this time, you'll have more breathing room to talk about what it is you've been covering and world events. And
Hmm.
yes, at the time back in June, we touched on some foreign policy stuff, and obviously, the Ukraine conflagration was the basically the only thing. And now we've got since October 7th, you know what? Israel
Yes.
and Gaza
Yes.
has just absolutely exploded back onto the scene,
Hmm.
putting the Middle East question and into peripherally the kind of Muslim and Jewish question under review again as well. In that way, it takes us back to the 2000s. But the difference here being, of course, that this was an attack on Israel. This is frankly Israel's problem. Back in the 2000s, we of course had the Afghanistan war, which was certainly at least more legitimate than the Iraq war that came a few years later. But in both cases, it was our war. Now, even though this is Israel's war, we are implicated, and it just the feeling on the street. If you look at the protests, it's as if it is our war as well. So
Well,
I wonder,
it is, and
discuss some of that if you
in
could.
some, yes, it is in some ways because America guarantees Israel's right to exist. An article I wrote a couple weeks ago, the original kind of Zionist document talking about a Jewish state from like it was 1897. He basically said that Europe would have to guarantee Israel's existence, and Europe has become America because Europe's not powerful anymore. But yes, America sent all those the ships, the aircraft carriers, and more as a show of force. And it's certainly the American political elite feel that it's absolutely their job to defend and protect Israel uh, for whatever reason. The problem now is that they're paying a huge price internationally. Um, Really, after for the last 2 years, America's been complaining about Russia, attacking Ukraine, which okay, fine. Uh, there's some merit to that. But on the other hand, in the past, America has bombed and attacked so many people that it seems hypocritical. But now Israel just literally just bombing indiscriminately Gaza. It's the only play in their playbook, really. To go in and try to root out each Hamas fighter is like it's not going to happen. It's unrealistic, and so they're trying basically to punish the Gazan people so that they'll root out Hamas. Whether that's going to work or not, we'll see. I have a feeling it's not. Um, but yeah, it's with Ukraine, now we have the Middle East. Although, to be honest, it's stayed under control. Hezbollah has been attacking Israel a little bit, and they've been responding, but it all seems like it's that there's the bigger powers are keeping things contained. Iran really hasn't gotten involved, but it extends America and Europe's supply lines basically because they're already short the ammunition and war production. America's kind of offshored that and doesn't isn't really good at that anymore. And so one thing I've always thought is that if I were China and I wanted to take Taiwan back, I would spread America out. I would instigate a North Korean front. To get all these fronts going, and then when America's so stretched, then go into Taiwan and take it. Um, so I don't know that we're there. I mean, this is you know we'll see, but this is step two. And once and North Korea has been making some moves the last couple of weeks, but that would be a very major event for them to attack South Korea. And so
Yeah.
I'm not sure. China's fairly conservative, and so they like the way things are going, but they see the future as theirs, and so I'm not sure how radical they'll actually be.
Oh, and you mentioned China and the North Korea and South Korea case, because North Korea is essentially taking its orders from China as far as anything like that would go. Or
To some extent,
yeah.
with Russia too. They would talk, and Iran, kind of the revisionist powers who want to overturn the established order. And so, yeah, whether, it could be, it could be kind of suicidal too for North Korea. So I'm not sure they're that crazy, but, they might just increase tension short of war, just to get America on alert. And so I'm not sure. We'll see. Like I said, the countervailing factor is that China is fairly conservative, and so they like the way things are going right now, so they don't need any big moves.
Do you think it's fair to say that we are in fact fighting two proxy wars right now, or has essentially all the resources and energy flipped from Ukraine to Israel, such that Ukraine is now, hung out to dry, to use that term?
Well, we've kind of cut Ukraine off. There's these. I don't follow the politics in America so closely, but I know in Congress now the aid is being held up. But to me, that's kind of planned, or they just kind of whisper to each other, "Okay, we're just going to go slow." They want Ukraine to start negotiating because they're not going to win. They're not going to get the Crimea. They're not going to get Sebastopol naval base. The America knows, it's not going to happen. And so they'd like to get this over with fairly soon, although there's not necessarily a super easy way out for Ukraine, for the individual politicians. And so defeat's never an easy thing to deal with. America's probably telling them, get this over with as quickly as possible. The sooner you get it over with, the less the defeat will be. But how they extricate themselves from, because Russia's under no pressure to end the war at all, and so things are just turning their way, and so
yeah, I remember
we'll see. But
hearing about stirrings of protest, back in 2022, suggesting the Russian people have had it and they were going to apply pressure to make sure that this war comes to an end or something like that. Well, whatever really happened with that, it sounds like not much. They just kind of acquiesced and things slid back into.
Well, there was a lot of U.S. kind of propaganda, or hopeful propaganda, kind of, like with the Iran too, with the protests there. They tried to encourage protests in Russia, and there are liberals, but we were in Russia, certainly in St. Petersburg. That's kind of like would be the New York City of Russia, and that's where Putin's from, actually. And so he's not really trusted.
Okay, so Moscow would be D.C. and St. Petersburg would be New York City.
Yeah.
I kind of felt Moscow would be all in one city. It's L.A., it's Moscow, it's D.C. Or excuse me, it's L.A., it's New York, it's D.C. Anyway,
it could almost be kind of like Chicago, though. But it's a little more conservative, certainly than St. Petersburg. But I don't know. It's hard nowadays. Maybe old Chicago, but because all kind of U.S. cities are very liberal, and so it's hard to say. But there were some small protests, but for the most part, the Russian people, they're not super excited about the war. On the other hand, they're not really, Putin's kept the negative impacts low enough. Obviously, young men are dying, nowhere near the levels the West says, but in any case, there are plenty. They're dying. Maybe they've lost 40, 50,000, which isn't nothing. And so, but on the other hand, he's kept Russia's kind of global position very high. Not in the West, obviously, but within the rest of the world. And the economy's doing well. He's managed the sanctions like a master. We say him, but Russia, the political elite have done a really good job managing the sanctions. Less well with the war. The war has been, but the war has been more kind of messy, not decisive. They're a great power. They could have gone in, rushed in, but they're holding a lot in reserve. They don't know where all this is going. And so generally the Russian people, I listen to several podcasts and different people, they say generally they support the war. Putin hasn't really had any domestic political problems in that area.
Okay, now you wrote, pivoting back south of Russia, you wrote a piece called "Echo and Narcissism: Why the West Enables."
Yes.
Go over that. That was interesting. It gets at somewhat of a, I don't know, a metaphorical and a philosophical, maybe even social psychological take on what it is that drives us. So yeah, that was interesting. Discuss that.
Well, there's a concept called group narcissism. I mean, to start with, I'm interested in psychology, and certainly narcissism and things like that have always interested me. And so the Frankfurt School came up with a concept, and Freud also, maybe slightly less distinctly, but the concept of group narcissism. So, but I always have to start first by we can't see narcissism as necessarily a negative word. Narcissism is like the urge to look out for yourself, to protect yourself, and so you need to have a certain level of narcissism. Otherwise, you're what's called a codependent, where you only have empathy for others, but you can't protect yourself, so you get taken advantage of. And so what I tried to do was, so the concept of group narcissism is well established. Ethno-narcissism, there's collective narcissism, there's different. That's all basically the same thing. And Nazi Germany is the primary example, the perfect example of it, the most extreme example of it. But there are plenty of others. And so what I came up with was the opposite, the collective codependency. So group narcissism and collective codependency. Collective codependency, I think the best example is Germany now, where they lost their narcissism and they completely reverted the other way, where they get just taken advantage of and they're just bullied, pushed around.
Yeah, that is
generally,
Europe's largest
obviously.
economy, and yet they find that Europe's largest economy, and yet they find that themselves in that situation. It's some kind of
really
giant.
Just in the last couple of years, it's gotten really bad. Because under Merkel, it wasn't that bad. She looked out. She tried to protect Germany. Certainly with Greece, you remember that whole episode with the debts, and she really kind of pushed Germany's national interest. But in the 2000s, it's really first with America, blowing up Nord Stream, pushing this whole war. I expected Germany to push back against this war because it was obviously going to be a disaster for them, and they didn't. And so, just expanding group narcissism to collective codependency, we see the U.S. and Europe towards Israel having just like guilted out, really, just not even being selfish and not looking out for their own interests, and just immediately kind of lowering themselves to supporting Israel. Now, I have to say, in the last couple of weeks, the Biden administration has started changing tact quietly and starting to push Israel and realizing that America has interests and these aren't necessarily coinciding right now. And so, it's long. I mean, I don't know how much we want to go into kind of like, with the right, with Trump and everything, the white working class, that was kind of a rise of group narcissism within whites, because you could say conservative whites or the more Trump-aligned conservative whites are more narcissistic, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because liberal whites could be considered codependent. With the Black Lives Matter.
Liberal whites are the complete opposite. They take the opposite extreme. They
hate each other. They hate themselves.
Yeah, they go. It's more than simply being indifferent or something. They actively shit on themselves.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. This is so. The stereotype is like the wife of an alcoholic, and so which isn't fair, because there are plenty of men who are codependent. It's not necessarily sex related. Both sides can be. It has more to do with how your parents treated you. But yes, it's you can see them just being totally codependent, self-loathing, basically. And so this can happen within any racial group, any kind of group can either be narcissistic or codependent.
Yeah, I believe there's a researcher in he might be out of school now or whatever. Zach Goldberg, he's kind of covered a lot of this stuff on
Yeah,
Twitter. He's looked at
yeah.
these kind of ethnic self-opinion and outward opinion about.
Interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. See, I've seen some of his stuff, but I didn't. I should follow up
Yeah,
on
and it
that.
was only white liberals were actually down on themselves. They felt that basically every other group was superior.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
but with blacks, they found some amount of ethnic narcissism. I don't know if you want.
Yes.
It can go too far. Of course, I don't know if he found that was somehow had reached pathological levels. I mean, that's all subjective. They have a number, but at what cutoff, I don't know. But
Where I tried to define it was using actually a Marxist thinker, Rodson, that when your group starts to be infallible, that's a very dangerous threshold that you've crossed. And so, and the other side is like when you have so much narcissism that you have no empathy for anyone else. That's not only is extremely dangerous as a group because empathy is very important in any kind of struggle. All groups want to like struggle to do well for themselves, but you have to understand the other groups in order to execute this struggle. If you don't, you'll end up losing. And so, to me, for blacks historically, and like say in the 1920s, 1930s, the Nation of Islam was exceedingly narcissistic and kind of just these fantasy kind of ideas. I tried to have some empathy for them because obviously, blacks suffered horribly under the racial laws in America. So it's similar to a child being abused, that they grow up to become narcissistic or codependent, depending. And so, on the other hand, you can see Martin Luther King had some narcissism, which is, he wanted blacks to at least be equal to better their position. But he also had a lot of empathy. He understood whites and he understood how to navigate the political battlefields to do the best he could for his people. I mean, in hindsight, things maybe have gotten a little better. I don't know. It's hard to say how
it's
much
funny.
things are good.
I feel like Malcolm X had more narcissism until he became a
Absolutely.
Muslim, and then he became some kind of a colorblind or religious universalist. But I don't know. I mean, at least at the end of Spike Lee's movie, that's the way they made it seem.
I don't know. Yeah, I only know the more narcissistic Malcolm X, and
Yeah,
frankly, is quite
his reputation is
fun to
that.
listen to. It's more kind of it gets to you like, yeah, yeah, it's far more kind of appeals emotionally to people. I mean, I was so removed. It was just like this guy's a fighter. He's like pushing.
Yeah.
And so my son's really into
Oh,
it.
go ahead.
So
Your son? Sorry.
my son really liked Malcolm X, and so he introduced me to some of his videos, and I knew who he was, and I read some, but I didn't really. Once you hear interviews with him, then you can really kind of understand. He's a very interesting thinker.
Yeah. Very eloquent. A lot of black intellectuals are quite interesting to listen to. Michael Eric Dyson has quite the way of speaking. I don't know if you know about that guy. Now, I disagree with him politically, but he is kind of charismatic and all of that, and can weave words. Now, here's an interesting angle. What about getting back to that piece, the Substack piece? Codependency in defense of narcissism, and by that I mean Israel is reliant on U.S. support almost exclusively. So to a great degree their ethnic and religious identity and its defense relies on a deeply dependent relationship with the U.S. So this would be codependent. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I would say they're the narcissistic, because narcissists often rely or manipulate their partner into providing resources for them. So that could be one reading of it. there, it depends. I mean, if you look at Netanyahu, because obviously Israel is a very complicated place, and there's all kinds of factions and different approaches. And so, if we look at the government now, Netanyahu's very kind of nationalistic, I'd say hyper narcissistic, no empathy at all for the Palestinians, and just pushing forward. And so, it's almost like kind of like a working class guy who marries like a very rich heiress from a wealthy family and manipulates her into funding his lifestyle. That would be one way of looking at it. Other, I'm sure there's other Israelis who don't like at all that Israel has to be dependent on America, because America is not necessarily the most dependable partner. They'd rather, and they would be more kind of the left pushing for a little more peace, because this highly militaristic, antagonistic approach means that Israel is going to be dependent on America for survival. Whereas, I don't know. I'm not going to say if they were all peace and love that everything would get better, because it is a tough neighborhood where they live. And so, but yes, they're in a delicate situation.
That writer, Jacob Siegel, writer for Tablet and other outlets, he has the opinion that you see it here and there, but that the U.S. the reliance on the U.S. actually restrains Israel too much. I might be misunderstanding what he said, but I it feels that they actually would be able to kind of deal with the Palestinian problem much more quickly and with overwhelming force if they weren't being sort of monitored at every step by a U.S. that contains a lot of domestic opposition to Israel. So he feels they'd have a greater hand to do what they like without U.S. support. I don't know.
That's possible. That's possible, but what would they do? I mean, they'd have to just wipe the slate clean, push the Palestinians completely out. They could do that, but they'd be all on their own. They're a very small country, and so you could have boycotts. Whether the Arabs or the Muslim nations would unify against Israel is anyone's guess. But I'm not sure. I mean, also, the Palestinians. If you look at the West Bank, they're like kind of self-occupying. They've tried to be more or less peaceful for the last 20 years with Fatah and the Oslo Accords and everything, and Israel's just kept grabbing land more and more. Whereas Gaza, Israel gave up Gaza. Gaza's never been part of Israel. They're not really interested in it. But
What about the Golan?
Hamas.
If I
time
understand,
and time again.
the Golan Heights is like the third Palestinian enclave, and we don't hear as much about that.
It's Syrian. It's actually
like
Syrian.
Heights. Golan Heights. It's like some kind of fancy neighborhood northwest of downtown LA or something.
Yeah, it does. No, I know. I follow the Golan Heights a lot. It's actually more kind of specialist because it's very interesting. I remember when the Syrian refugee problems, like in 2015, 2014, a lot of people would say, "Hey, just put them on the Golan Heights. You have all this land. It's their land anyway. Why bring them to Europe or to the U.S.?"
Right, at the border of Syria.
It belongs to Syria. And there was just a UN vote. It was very interesting to saying that the Golan Heights should go back to Syria, and a few of the Anglo-Saxon countries said no, but all of Europe abstained, and then the global South and the BRICS and all that voted for it, obviously. But but when it comes to Ukraine, it's the complete opposite. So because right now, technically, all the land Russia captures is occupied territory. It's just like, Israel captured all that in 1967. They captured the Sinai Desert as well, but they ended up giving that back to Egypt. They made a peace deal under Jimmy Carter. But the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and Golan Heights, they've kept. And I think they came close to the Golan Heights in around 2000, but the deal didn't happen.
Yeah. And I just want to backtrack for a moment. When I said, speaking about Jacob Siegel's opinion here, I want to add, and this is important, that people like him believe that if Israel were to act with overwhelming force, such that short term it looks ethically horrible, it would actually save lives in the long run. So that's generally the argument. Yeah. I get this.
Yeah, that's a possible argument, just in general, not just for Israel. In war,
right. Yeah.
It's quite often made, that argument, that it's better to be, it's kinder to be cruel, to be super cruel, and get the job done quickly, as opposed to being nice and dragging it out forever. That's one way of looking at it, and it's a possible approach. Whether it would actually work in reality, I'd have to read. What is his goal with the Palestinians? The only way I can see you can have a decisive victory is to get rid of them. Kind of crushing them into kind of submission, domesticating them. Is a very difficult.
I guess the idea is that make punishment for anything like Hamas, support for anything like Hamas, an organization like that, so obviously detrimental that they'd be forced into something more conciliatory and to Israel and to just liberal Democrats' liking. So secular.
That's what they try. That's their policy in general, but it's on paper. But actually carrying it out is always not as easy. Problem is they created Hamas. As a kind of counterweight to the PLO, and frankly, that was dumb because the PLO
was useless. Created or supported, because aren't they an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood?
Yeah, but there's plenty of articles. They you could say, whether create or support, they definitely encouraged their development in order to split the opposition. So exactly to what extent, I don't think Hamas would. I could put it this way: Hamas wouldn't exist if Israel didn't actively assist them to exist. So, because before, the 70s, 60s, 70s, it was all PLO, and they were kind of useless as an insurgency group. And so Israel could, they had a good thing going. They could crush the PLO constantly. Hamas still they haven't really performed all that well. This surprise attack was, not from a moral point of view, but from a military point of view, they executed it seemingly very well. It's hard to tell what their grand strategy is, what they're trying to achieve. It's not a conventional, straight up war where they're going to kill more Israelis or anything. It's a political war, and so. And when Israel's kind of stock in the world has gone way down in the last couple of months, and so so far you could say that they've been pretty successful, Hamas.